Soybeans having new corrections and wheat rallying this Friday. Jerry Gidel will weigh in on these issues on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. If you are new here, please make sure to subscribe. So Jerry, today after we had some things with the soybean complex, uh, the soybeans are dropping again after a drop on Thursday.
Yeah, it's been a really kind of up and down week this week for the grains and soybeans, particularly here. Our conversation last week about things getting kind of interesting in the soybean meal because of it moving above 350 kind of kept things kind of rolling all the way until I think it was like Wednesday or so this week. As we kind of broke a downtrend line, we got people kind of fired up there, and we actually moved up closer to the 380 mark there on the nearby December meal. And meal this time of year, people are starting to get their supplies around them here for the winter time, getting closer to that so they don't get trapped in any kind of snow issues and that. And feed manufacturers like to get the control of their costs, things like that. And interestingly enough, I think there still was just a lot of people that a lot more bullish soybean oil, I should say, and the general strength of veg oil around the world. A lot of people had some long oil, short meal on, lots of different things that going on in that complex there that ultimately kind of culminated with a pretty emotional reaction on midweek. Things have kind of backed off as the market didn't find any real exciting export sales this week. They were solid kind of numbers there, 48 to 50 million on beans and high numbers on corn. Wheat was even higher than it has been recently in that on the US, but wheat in general has really, its strength is coming from around the world. It really hasn't come from the US market here, despite the fact that, we had such a poor spring wheat number.
Yes, for me it's very impressive the momentum that wheat has gained over the last several months, and in comparison with a very different situation in previous years.
Oh yeah, the interesting twist about it this time around, yeah, we've got uh, a reduction in the total in world stocks on wheat, but it's really interesting is that most of that stocks have come from the important producers out there. The Black Sea, Ukraine and Russia had one was up and one was down last year. Now it's maybe a little bit different this year. The quality of the crop in Europe was damaged. The top quality wasn't there. Of course, we know that Canada had a very difficult crop. We had a very difficult spring crop. And then recently we've had the issues of Australia that people are looking to for some quality. Has had a lot of rain, and that rain tends to end up washing out your protein along the way from there. And then this week they were talking about things in the world and the fact that they continue to see an upward movement here in the Russians' export tax. Interestingly enough, we had a very hefty purchase from from Algeria, which traditionally buys from Europe, but they didn't think they had the quality there, so they kind of worked over towards the Russian side of the Mediterranean. And then we've had some other purchases along the way. Egypt, it came in for a small buy. It's just interesting that there's still a lot of uncertainty here about the quality of this year's crop and the amount of that good supply out there. Now, there's been some purchases made from China, I think, in the feed wheat world. They were searching around in Europe for some of that, and I think they do have some of that available. That's the reason why I think corn probably was not as sparky as it could have been, considering the strength we've had in wheat this last few weeks. Also, I think there's just The South American situation hasn't really opened itself up here at this point for the La Nina impact on southern Brazil and on into Argentina. It's building. It's still going to potentially be a pretty significant event this year, but it hasn't really been as significant as it was this time last year when it was already in kind of full blown stage, and there's still minimal kind of moisture even across many parts of Brazil, and the same thing in Argentina, and that. So it's kind of a twisted situation there on the corn side, but in general here we've had some strength and it's rallied up to some important resistance levels this last few days too.
And where do you think the next rally will be?
Well, that's an interesting one. Type wise, I think we really have to zero in on the impact of what happens on the weather down in South America to really have a significant rally, and we might actually go sideways in the month of first part of December here. There's some talk that the dryness is really going to start to intensify in Argentina mid-December and afterwards here, and that makes some sense as the La Nina type tightens up here at this point. And that we last week you mentioned about utilizing rallies for sales, and I think that's still a short-term situation here. Thanksgiving week in the U.S. Always is a tricky one. It can be somewhat lackadaisical, and at times it can be real strong right before the holiday, it can be strong after the holiday. It's a really choppy situation, but I think it's still not going to end up being a real defensive week here, because I think there's still a certain amount of U.S. supplies that need to move down the Mississippi River, and the deadline on that's usually in early December here north of St. Louis. And so I think that's going to be a feature in this thing. But in general here, we're going to need to see some weather issues in South America, or maybe we're going to find some enthusiasm from the Chinese here to look at the U.S. crops. The U.S. dollar has been strong. That's going to discourage some of the purchases in various times in here. Particularly wheat, it's always been a lot more sensitive to U.S. dollar strength because there's so many different places to buy wheat. But corn and soybeans isn't so easy to go look in other places, and South America is pretty well out of their supplies and not going to have any supplies available here until we get into late January, February on beans and that type of thing. And corn, really, there's not limited situations coming out of both Argentina and Brazil here for most of this year until we get into the spring and after.
And this week we also have seen problems of transportation in Canada.
Oh yes, that was something I should good reminder there on that. That the situation up there in Vancouver, they had a very hefty rain that came in, and well, it's talking about 8 inches in a day and a half or something, and we saw some pretty interesting railroad photos there of washouts and bridges out and things like that on the approach into Vancouver. Vancouver's in a low spot, but you've got the whole Canadian Rockies right there, just on the doorstep of Vancouver, and so it's kind of an interesting transportation issue. I just caught a report here just before we got on today, and the fact that the Canadian Pacific seems to be optimistic they might have found a particular access to get some things in here and get some repairs done. So by mid next week, I was really surprised that we would even have that coming along that quickly. But I think that's another factor that's taken away some export supplies in the short term. I guess we'll have to see if Canadian National, the other big railroads that services Vancouver, will be able to get their access going. And I'm not sure it's going to be, it wasn't the main line they're going to be able to get going. So this is going to be kind of a cobbled up deal here for a while. And there's still a lot of repairs that need to be done on the railroad system going into Vancouver. And so that's something that the market will be watching closely here in general. light volume for next week will also make things a little choppy. As there always the amount of fund activity can have a lot more impact when there's not as much commercial activity or other things going on in the markets during the Thanksgiving holiday. Since we will not have any trade on Thursday, and we won't start our trade until Friday at 8:30. So that will make things interesting there. And it's also good that we're not sitting around looking at the world trade on holiday night, which I always like.
And what do we expect to watch in the beginning of next week?
Well, as I said, we'll see what's going on in Canada. We'll be watching the weather in South America, and and what might be going on in the export activity out there. We've had some people make some pretty sizable purchases, like we just mentioned, for Algeria. And there's been some reports that Iran and Iraq's wheat crops are not maybe could have some further declines on them, so they could be particularly buyers in that wheat market. Wheat is going to still be our big leader here overall. It's going to set the tone. If there's people excited about wheat, corn and beans aren't going to slip too much.
All right, sir. We'll keep in touch.
Always good, and look forward to speaking with people next week.